Conscientious objectors in the Vietnam War. Some thought their actions were cowardly, others heroic. They refused to be drafted because they thought the war was wrong. Their refusal to enter the war helped the government see that the war did not have the support of the people of the U.S. Before I go on anymore, what is a CO? Conscientious objectors are those who, for political and religious reasons, oppose war. Their opposition may take several forms, such as refusing to serve in the military, to register for the draft, to pay war taxes, or to contribute to the war efforts in any way. Roger Stewart is a professor at BSU and was a 1973 conscientious objector in the Vietnam War. Nobody knows the person who first used the term conscientious objector, but a man named General Jan Smuts is said to be its originator. Conscientious objector status is for people who are opposed to all war on the grounds of religion or pacifism. COs were the aftermath of pacifists in the U.S. Pacifists are peace lovers who take a stand against violence. The early colonial settlers were Quakers and Mennonites and Church of the Brethren, and all three believed in nonviolence. So these pacifists set the foundation for American religious beliefs. Not all pacifists will remain pacifists forever, such as Albert Einstein, who was a strong pacifist until he disagreed with Adolf Hitler. Gandhi is also one of the most famous pacifists in history.
That you're being selective and when you want to participate in violence and when you don't. And then you're not a conscientious objector. You think of Mahatma Gandhi. He was the classic conscientious objector. No matter what was done to him, he would not fight back. He took a nonviolent stance no matter what the situation was. And that's what a true conscientious objector is.
Like, if you're a conscientious objector for one war, then you are for all wars. Is that true?
Yes. Yeah, you can't be a conscientious objector selectively. You either believe in a stance of anti-violence.
There were pacifists in all the U.S. wars that had the draft. In the Civil War, there were 3,989 COs, less than 1% of all those who were called to serve. In World War I, there were 56,380 COs, again less than 1%. In World War II, there were 43,000, still less than 1%. In the Vietnam War, however, there were 173,000 men granted CO status, which was 9% of the total inducted. This does not include other forms of resistance, such as a physical deferment, technical appeals like hardship, meaning they need to stay home to support their families, joining the reserves of the National Guard, dodging the draft by going up north to Canada, going to college, which was called a college deferment. If you had been arrested in an anti-war protest, even if you were classified as 1A, you would not be drafted, but most people did not know this until after the war.
Okay. Did any of your friends become a conscientious objector or go to war?
Yeah, none of my friends became conscientious objectors. I knew several people that got out of the draft in what I think were less than honorable ways. One guy ate bananas for 6 months and put on like 200 pounds and was denied, was actually not drafted because of being obese. In today's world, lots of people are obese, but back in those days, you could actually put on enough weight to stay out of the draft.
There were several steps in becoming a CO in the Vietnam War involving the draft board. First, a man gets notice that he has been found qualified for military service. He has the opportunity to claim for classification as a conscientious objector. A registrant making claim for conscientious objection was required to appear before his local board to explain his beliefs. He needed to provide written documentation of how he arrived at his beliefs and how it impacted his life. The local board would decide whether to grant or deny a CO classification based on evidence a registrant has presented. A man may appeal to the local board's decision to a selective service district appeal board. The draft board not only existed to draft men for the war, but was part of a scheme to reform the nation by giving deferments to certain classes of young people.
These green cards and this receipt right here, these you had to respond to the draft board within a certain amount of time. And if you didn't, you were done. You were just done. And it was one way they got you. That's all there is to it, because I don't think many 17, 18, 19-year-old kids would be able to do all of it. Like after you appeared before the board, you had like 72 hours to respond or something. I can't remember now. And you had to send things certified mail. And these are all the receipts for certified mail for my responses to the draft board. So after not go to the military service, because in the end, the only people who weren't going to college, and those were many of the poor people, minority people, they got stuck going to the draft, going to the Army, whereas people who were in college, which is primarily middle class, white people back in those days, they didn't go to the draft, and that's not fair. Getting out as a result of some sort of a deferment like college wasn't, I think, an honorable way to confront the issue of the draft, the war, and all that kind of stuff, so I pursued the conscientious objector status.
Even for those who were not poor, you had to play a game to get CO status.
You're going to find in this, Kate, and I'm just going to be honest with you, there's a mixture of fibs and honesty in all this. Mm-hmm. You had to play the game in order to get this status, and one of the games was to look like you were a Christian. So, mm-hmm. You know, I kind of made myself look like some great virtuous person on the camera, and I really shouldn't have, because...
Why the huge number of COs in the Vietnam War? The answer to the question is hidden in the history of the war. It was a time of hippies, free love, and college war protest. Some of these reasons include: 1. It was the longest war the U.S. has been involved in, spanning 10 years. 2nd, COs to the Vietnam War were part of a broad anti-war movement against the war and against drafting men into the war. 3rd, unlike World War II, some people thought the domino theory was not important enough for them to go fight. And last, so many men were dying in Vietnam, it was making people at home feel uneasy. So, in the end, did conscientious objectors taking a stand make any difference? Roger Stewart thinks so.
An anti-war peace stance has been vindicated. They weren't just wars. There were lies getting us into these wars. There were lies to keep us in these wars. Hundreds of thousands, millions of innocent people were killed, and to take a stand against that and say, no, I'm not going to participate in this, was, I think, the appropriate thing to do at the time.
But some of our World War II Purple Heart vets disagree.
What did you think of conscientious objectors?
I think they're a bunch of chickens.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not willing to serve their country, they shouldn't be in it.
Do you feel the same about Vietnam conscientious objectors?
Yeah.
But I agree with leaders in history like Martin Luther King Jr., who believed COs were a part of a broad anti-war movement that made a difference. King said, "We must be prepared to match actions with words by seeking out every creative mean of protest possible. As we counsel young men concerning military service, we must clarify for them our nation's role in Vietnam and challenge them with the alternative of conscientious subjection." Mentioning the risks of becoming a CO, John F. Kennedy said, "People have not been horrified by war to a sufficient extent. War will exist until the distant day when the conscientious objector enjoys the same reputation and prestige as the warrior does at home." Will there be another draft? If so, will there be COs? Today, the Selective Service System has a budget of $28 million for drafting men. When there is another draft, I have some recommendations I would suggest. 1 is COs shouldn't have to be religious to object. Also, the government should make it easier for uneducated men. Next, if a CO wanted to object to only one war, they could. The world may always have war, and warriors who are willing to sacrifice. These warriors are heroes, as they should be. But maybe someday COs will be heroes for taking a stand in history.
Where have all the young girls gone?